The book of Exodus tells a powerful story of faith, liberation, and the enduring covenant between God and his chosen people, the Israelites. It begins with the Israelites living in Egypt, having migrated there generations earlier. Initially welcomed, the Israelites found themselves increasingly oppressed under a new Pharaoh who did not remember Joseph's contributions to Egypt. The Israelites endured forced labor and cruel treatment. They cried out to God for deliverance from their suffering. God heard their cries and responded with compassion and action. He chose Moses, a Hebrew man raised in the Pharaoh's court, to be his instrument of liberation. Moses, initially reluctant, accepted God's call. He confronted Pharaoh, demanding the release of the Israelites. Pharaoh refused, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt. The Egyptian empire was powerful, with a complex social structure and belief system. However, the God of Israel would demonstrate his sovereignty over all creation, including the seemingly invincible Pharaoh. The stage was set for a cosmic clash that would forever shape the destiny of the Israelites and the course of human history. To break Pharaoh's stubborn resistance and demonstrate his absolute power, God sent a series of 10 plagues upon Egypt. These plagues were not random acts of destruction. They were carefully targeted demonstrations of God's power over the very elements and deities that the Egyptians revered. The Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned to blood. Frogs, symbols of fertility, swarmed the land. Gnats and flies associated with the god Set became an unbearable plague. Livestock died, striking at the economic heart of Egypt. Boils and hailstorms rained down, demonstrating God's mastery over the heavens. Each plague intensified the pressure on Pharaoh, yet hardened his heart. He refused to relent. The plagues revealed the impotence of the Egyptian gods in the face of the one true God. They served as undeniable signs of God's power and his determination to liberate his people. The 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most devastating. It forced Pharaoh to finally relent and allow the Israelites to leave Egypt. However, this final plague also became the basis for a sacred covenant ritual known as Passover. God instructed the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb without blemish and mark their doorposts with its blood. When the angel of death passed through Egypt that night, he would pass over the homes marked with the blood of the lamb, sparing the firstborn within. The Israelites celebrated the first Passover with a special meal. This meal included unleavened bread, a reminder of their hasty departure from Egypt. Passover became a central observance in Judaism, commemorating God's deliverance and the sanctity of the covenant. The Passover lamb prefigured Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, whose sacrifice would ultimately redeem humanity from sin and death. The themes of sacrifice, redemption, and God's faithfulness, first introduced in the Passover narrative, would echo throughout the Bible and into Christian theology. Pharaoh, finally relenting after the death of his firstborn son, allowed the Israelites to leave. Their departure with their families, livestock, and possessions marked the beginning of the Exodus. However, Pharaoh's resolve soon hardened again. He pursued the fleeing Israelites with his army. The Israelites found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's pursuing forces and the Red Sea. In a moment of terror and despair, they cried out to God. Responding to their pleas, God commanded Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. The waters parted miraculously, creating a dry path for the Israelites to cross. As the Egyptian army pursued, the waters closed in, drowning Pharaoh's forces. This miraculous event, the parting of the Red Sea, became a defining moment in Israelite history, forever etched in their collective memory as a testament to God's power and faithfulness. After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites journeyed into the wilderness of Sinai. It was there, at the foot of Mount Sinai, that God established a covenant with them. This covenant, sealed by the blood of sacrifice, transformed the Israelites from a group of former slaves into a nation set apart for God's purposes. Moses ascended Mount Sinai. God spoke to him directly, revealing his laws and commandments. These laws were not merely a set of arbitrary rules, but a blueprint for a just and compassionate society. They were intended to shape the Israelites into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, reflecting God's character to the world. The covenant at Sinai was a bilateral agreement. God promised to protect and bless the Israelites, making them a light to the nations. In return, the Israelites pledged their obedience to God's laws and their commitment to living as his chosen people. Central to the covenant at Sinai were the Ten Commandments. These commandments, inscribed on stone tablets by God himself, summarized the core principles of a life lived in right relationship with God and with one another. The first four commandments focus on the proper worship of God. They forbid idolatry, taking God's name in vain, and violating the Sabbath. The remaining commandments address interpersonal relationships, prohibiting murder, adultery, theft, false witness, and coveting. The Ten Commandments provided a universal moral code applicable to all people and times. They transcended the specific historical context of the Exodus, offering timeless principles for building a just and compassionate society. The Ten Commandments have profoundly influenced Western legal and ethical systems, forming the cornerstone of Western civilization's understanding of justice and morality. As part of the covenant, God instructed the Israelites to build a portable sanctuary called the tabernacle. This structure, meticulously designed according to God's specifications, served as a visible symbol of God's presence among his people. The tabernacle was divided into two main sections. The holy place contained the altar of incense and the table of showbread. The Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber, housed the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred chest containing the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. The tabernacle's elaborate rituals and sacrifices symbolized the Israelites' relationship with God. It was a place of atonement, worship, and communion with the divine. The tabernacle served as a constant reminder of God's holiness, his presence among his people, and the sacred covenant that bound them together. The Exodus journey did not end at Mount Sinai. The Israelites still faced a long and arduous journey through the wilderness to the Promised Land. This journey, which lasted 40 years, tested their faith and obedience in profound ways. They faced hunger, thirst, and attacks from hostile tribes. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron, questioning God's guidance and provision. Despite these challenges, God remained faithful, providing for their needs, protecting them from harm, and gradually shaping them into the people he had called them to be. The wilderness wanderings became a time of spiritual formation and refinement. The Israelites learned the importance of trusting God, relying on his promises and obeying his commands, even in the face of adversity. The wilderness became a classroom where they learned the true meaning of faith and the cost of discipleship. The book of Exodus highlights the reciprocal nature of the covenant relationship between God and his people. God demonstrated his faithfulness by delivering the Israelites from slavery, guiding them through the wilderness, and providing for their needs. In return, the Israelites were expected to demonstrate their faithfulness through obedience to God's laws, worship, and a commitment to living as his chosen people. The covenant was not a one-sided agreement, but a dynamic partnership based on mutual love, faithfulness, and responsibility. The Exodus story emphasizes that God's blessings are often accompanied by responsibilities. God's gracious provision was not a license for complacency, but a call to a deeper commitment to living out the covenant stipulations. The Exodus reminds us that true freedom is not merely the absence of external constraints, but the embrace of a life lived in obedience to God's will. Throughout the Exodus journey, obedience to God's commands was paramount. When the Israelites obeyed, they experienced God's blessing and protection. However, when they disobeyed, they faced consequences and setbacks. Their failures served as object lessons, highlighting the importance of remaining faithful to the covenant. The story of the golden calf, for example, illustrates the dangers of idolatry and disobedience. While Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving God's laws, the Israelites grew impatient. They built a golden calf, reverting to the idolatry of Egypt. This act of rebellion incurred God's anger and resulted in severe consequences. The golden calf incident underscored the seriousness of covenant disobedience and the importance of remaining faithful to the one true God. The book of Exodus leaves an enduring legacy of faith, freedom, and the importance of covenant relationship with God. It reminds us that God hears the cries of the oppressed and acts with power to deliver them. Exodus teaches that true freedom is not merely the absence of oppression, but the experience of living in right relationship with God and with one another. The Exodus story continues to resonate with people around the world who long for liberation, justice, and a restored relationship with God. It speaks to the human desire for meaning, purpose, and a life lived in harmony with the divine. The book of Exodus reminds us that God is faithful to his promises. He is a God who delivers, protects, and guides his people. In return, he calls us to respond with faith, obedience, and a commitment to living as his ambassadors of grace and truth in a world desperately in need of his love and redemption.